Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and the winner for the poll for today's video was, well, why have people stopped believing experts? Now, times was when people looked to experts. We've all seen the early television adverts that had doctors, or at least people posing as doctors, recommending brands of alcohol and cigarettes. More recently, models selling cosmetics, but with the background of a clean laboratory, therefore emphasising the science involved. It's not just people in the garage throwing random things together, honest. But in this post-truth apocalypse, people seem much keener to actively disbelieve experts and expertise in general. Now, my first major experience of this, I think, was during the Wakefield scandal. So Dr. Wakefield proposed a link between autism and receiving the triple MMR vaccine in the UK. This was despite every medical expert in the country saying otherwise. I even used his analysis with my maths students at the time, as he'd made such a bad job of it. It was a useful exercise in how easily people can use statistics to mislead. And I still use it now for the same reason. It's really important to impress upon my students how easily many are fooled by a misrepresentation of data. But what amazed me was the extent to which people believed this one rogue doctor over the entire scientific and medical community. It was like, even then, people had a paranoia about the establishment and would willingly believe this one guy who in their minds is just trying to get the truth out there, even when it's putting their children in mortal danger. There were even stories of nurses refusing to give their children the vaccinations. Now, another thing that I felt was adding fuel to the fire was the media treating Wakefield's assertions as if they were valid. And this is another misrepresentation that the media provides and still does now. In fact, it's worse now. In the name of balance, you'll get an expert having to debate with an ignoramus because all the experts agree with each other. So there's no debate to be had there. So and that's when it's worse as well. When you actually should be getting out the idea that actually, do you know what, on this point, the experts agree. But in the name of balance, you've got to get someone with a counterpoint. That person, of course, is an absolute imbecile. The Irish comedian Dara O'Brien put it best for me. He says, "You do not get a dentist to debate with a man who extracts his own teeth with string and a door." And anyone with a decent level of statistical knowledge could instantly see, going back to the Wakefield thing, that his analysis was wrong. It was actually pretty terrible. And yet national newspapers and television news officers were treating it as if it's worthy of consideration. And I suppose this was because the media will jump on anything sensational because they view their role, I think, these days as less information and more entertainment in an increasingly crowded market. And nothing entertains more than a good conspiracy. And so far-reaching was the damage that this man caused that even long after it's been officially discredited, the anti-vaxxers have grown into a group that managed to endanger their children's life without recourse. Endanger your child's life due to negligence and the law takes action. But do it deliberately in this way, and apparently it's a political choice to which you're entitled. So roll on nearly a couple of decades, and we have the Conservative Minister Michael Gove a couple of years ago saying, when he couldn't actually come up with an argument against this barrage of expert opinion, without a hint of irony, he said, people have had enough of experts. And as shown in the referendum, can't really say he was wrong, can you? We now live in a world where Michael Gove is right. Congratulations. We are now officially the laughingstock of people who make life decisions based upon how tea leaves arrange themselves in a cup. And having them proved wrong doesn't even stop the situation. The Brexiteers all said we'd stay in the single market, but we'd not have freedom of movement. They were wrong. They said we'd be able to arrange trade deals with the EU really quickly. They were wrong. They also said we'd be able to make great trade deals around the world. And yet we've not even been able to negotiate agreements on the current terms, the ones we already have, except for about 5 countries. That's it. That's all we've got. You know, it's worth about 1.2% of our goods exports, the amount of agreements that we've got, when all we had to do was copy it across. So why don't people trust experts anymore? Well, wouldn't you know it? German scientists conducted a study into just this phenomenon a few years ago. They considered what they called epistemic trustworthiness. It's a term which is used to describe a decision for someone to trust an expert on a matter for which their expertise is rather lacking. They said that for someone to be considered a suitable source of expertise and therefore worth listening to, they needed knowledge, honesty, and good-heartedness. Now, I know what you're thinking. David Davis, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nigel Farage, they have none of these qualities. No, they don't. But it's much less about the sort of supposed experts that people will listen to and why they won't listen to actual experts, because after all, those people just filling in the void. The idea that was put forward was that experts, when explaining something complicated, often don't use especially friendly language. It can frequently come across as haughty even, which can be off-putting for lay people who may already feel a little inadequate at not understanding the issue in the first place. As a teacher, I've been trained to use appropriate language to suit my students, taking into account a range of factors to make sure that I can explain the concepts in a way that engages them. But most people don't spend any time at all thinking about how to explain a complicated issue in a way that is accessible to lay people. Some may even take the view that, well, it's a complicated issue. What's the point of explaining it to the plebs? They should just trust our judgment. And perhaps they're right at times, but that's not endearing them to the public. And in the absence of accessible expert explanations, people will gravitate to whichever snake oil trader says they can provide them with all the answers. Now, one thing that I personally find odd is that people in general are always happy to assume that the government are up to no good, but those same people believe that newspapers are on their side. Both manipulate the public to their own ends, but I am of the view that at least governments are not always trying to deceive. Newspapers make their money by attracting readers, and only sensationalism attracts buyers in a crowded market, but governments are not always about exaggerating their own achievements or bashing those of their opponents. So sometimes they're just getting things done as necessary and there's nothing untoward going on at all. So the way I think of it is, politicians need to coerce us into voting for them every few years, so there's a certain level of dishonesty there. But newspapers need to do it every single day. So the motivation to deceive is actually stronger for the media than it is for politicians. Now, I'm not suggesting that there aren't honest people in the media, just like there are honest people, in politics as well. But the motivation. So association with the government is potentially another source of failing on the honesty criterion. And looking at the situation, experts, of course, are likely to have links to the government. After all, government commission experts to prepare reports on issues that government has to make decisions on, but of course has no expert knowledge on because politicians need no qualifications. Whereas ignorant celebrities are always in newspapers and somehow come across as being honest and good-hearted, if of course that newspaper wishes to portray them as such. It was the same with the Wakefield scandal. Medical experts were saying that you should vaccinate your child with the MMR vaccine, it was totally safe, but so were the government. Dr. Wakefield was getting coverage in newspapers though. So it's like people mistrusted the medical experts because they were supported by the government, and they trusted Dr. Wakefield because newspapers were pretending to take him seriously. So back to that report again. And what it says is that for experts to be taken seriously, they need to come across as honest and good-hearted, as well as knowledgeable, something that Brexiteers exploited. They have no knowledge of the matters that they feel happy talking about, but they constantly bash the government, thus ticking the honesty box. Because people always assume that the government are dishonest, and so anyone calling them out by some perverse logic must therefore be honest by extension. They also make up a threat to people's lives, incomes, living standards, or whatever else seems to work in order to tick the good-hearted box. So, for example, President Trump made an enemy of the Islamic world so he could pretend to be the great protector. And Brexiteers made an enemy of the EU so they could do likewise. And when it comes to the third, and you would think most important trait, having knowledge, how do people decide that? I mean, that's quite difficult really, isn't it? The problem is that people have no level of expertise in a thing themselves. And let's face it, quite a lot of people have no expertise in anything. They're going to struggle to know how to assess the level of expertise in others. And our celebrity culture doesn't really help either. For example, I studied physics at a top university in the UK, and I have a keen interest in science even outside my own work. But although I could tell you who won what more specifically won the Nobel Prize for Physics last year, I couldn't tell you the names of the recipients of the prize. Like anyone else, if you asked me to name, off the top of my head, living physicists, I'd have to name those that have some celebrity status. Michio Kaku, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Brian Cox, Brian May. Sorry, can't resist a Queen reference. But at least those people do have expertise. But most celebrities don't. We have a culture where you can become famous by doing something incredibly stupid, and then if the public endear themselves to this plucky loser, they'll be then invited to provide advice to the general public. Now, I don't want to pick on people here, but shall we say that there was someone who was made famous as a result of being a contestant on Big Brother a while ago? They were so stupid that they thought the sun and the moon were the same thing. And that's not just ignorance, because quite a lot of the time you can see the sun and the moon in the sky at the same time. But they have well over 250,000 followers on Twitter as they pass what passes for their wisdom on every single day. So why don't people believe in experts? Because people are unable to judge the expertise of people in a field with which they have no expertise themselves, and experts don't really do enough to be more accessible. Fault on both sides, and we're all screwed. So there we go. I hope you found that video interesting. If you did, don't forget to like, comment as well. Always interested in reading comments, and subscribe for further content, and click the bell notification as well. And until next time, I'll see you later.